Before you got married, you worked in the farm too, you told me.
Yes.
What was that like, Michelina?
Oh, beautiful. That time it was, no, when you abuse, and you abuse of here, lo beginning in life, not to do this your job. You know, even in Italy.
When you worked on the farm,
you work in the farm, in the morning you get up, when you start to be little light, you get up, you go to work, you be so beautiful.
Really?
Beautiful. My mother, 72 o'clock, stick to breakfast. When my mother come in the farm, we have a lot of chicken. My mother used to call, all of the chicken is on it to mother.
I was just trying to capture the stories of working class, regular, common Italian Americans and get their story, because I realized that if we didn't get these stories, it was going to be lost. You know, I grew up in a typical Italian American neighborhood where, grandparents lived downstairs. We lived upstairs. Another set of grandparents lived next door. Across the street. Yeah, across the street was a transplanted little Italian village. It really was. Across the street, I had two grown uncles with their wives and all kinds of cousins running around. They didn't venture too far either. And but the base of it, the source of all our culture were our grandparents. And I was always around my grandparents. And here I am, this third generation Italian American kid growing up in the 50s in the age of Elvis and the atomic age. And if I ever wanted to go back to the 1700s or the 1800s, all I had to do was go downstairs. I don't know if you know Boston, but it's very, very, it's not even provincial. It's so territorial. Every corner is owned by somebody, at least in those days. Never mind the streets. It was still street corner society in those days. And my job was to run the Senior Citizen Center, which was a drop-in center for elders. They're all on fixed incomes. They're still living in these cold water flats that go back to the 40s and 30s. They're still speaking in their old dialects, okay? And they're poor. Basically, they're just living on Social Security. And they're living in these freezing cold water. Anyway, so I open up this drop-in center. This is federally funded in this neighborhood center. And I become the senior citizen coordinator. So what happens? Because I understood the Southern code of behavior, because I understood what it meant to be old when I was very young, because of my experiences with my grandparents, because I was taught that I don't want to sound corny, you know how it is, but that old world respect, that way of behaving and acting towards your elders, it was ground into me from a year. So I knew how to act with these folks, and I spoke the language. And I understood the dialect, because no one spoke really Italian. They were all talking Sicilian. They were talking Calabrese. They were talking dialects of, it was like a cosmopolitan. So it was like Southern Italy in the north end of Boston. The information highway are the streets and the corners. Everybody's talking with each other. There's no internet. So the word goes out. You got trouble? You got trouble with your landlord. Your pipes don't work. You need go see Andonia. Gila parla italiana, non ti preoccupare, vai a vedere Antonio. Everybody go see Anthony, no problem, he'll help you. So now there's like a line in the place, because why? I don't know, because my parents just taught me to be compassionate, to be nice to people, to listen. I learned how to listen at a very young age, because that's the culture we grew up in. We learned how to listen as kids, not to respond. Think about this for a second, Bob. The nature of our oral history culture. I don't know about, this is how you listened to learn, not to respond. Our ancestors didn't write their history because they couldn't. And maybe their own expression, their only way of expressing themselves was, we have to remember, our oral history tradition goes back to, the Odyssey. So that tradition of passing down our culture from father to son, mother to daughter, was known for thousands of years. And so they brought that here. With them.
I think the biggest value that I remember was respect for your grandparents, your aunts and uncles. I remember going to my grandmother's house, my mother coaching us on the way to make sure we kissed our grandmother, kissed our aunt. And that was really, really instilled, especially respect for your elders. I think the other thing, or the other value, was that all my uncles and some of my aunts, but all my uncles were hardworking men. A couple were upholsterers. Another uncle was a butcher, and they had great work ethic. They instilled that upon us, to work hard, value family, and respect. I think the biggest thing was respect. I think the biggest difference from what you see in Italian movies, especially when it comes to the movies, was, when the movies were portrayed as not always the brightest people growing up, but that wasn't as evident. But as you get older, you start to think about your childhood and you say, well, we didn't have that. I don't remember that. They show people, cursing around the table and fighting all the time. And I didn't see any of that growing up. And I don't think any of my friends did either. The whole mafia thing, at a young age, I didn't realize. I mean, there were some people that I later on knew were in the mafia, but they weren't the type of people that you see. They were very, very low key. Yeah, I guess they made their money in ways that weren't always quite legal, but they certainly weren't running around shooting people and things like that. I didn't grow up in an Italian-American neighborhood, although we used to go to my grandparents, once or twice a week, which was Corona, Queens, New York, very Italian neighborhood. So Italian that, that's the language that you heard. You'd walk down the street and, you'd hear people, most people speaking Italian. Everybody's grandmother was alive and they were all speaking either in Italian or probably most likely a dialect. We thought it was Italian, but it was probably a dialect. But, the pork store, the bakery, most of the places were owned, the funeral parlors, most of the places all had Italian names on it. And everybody knew each other. Everybody was friends with each other. And the feasts, there were a couple twice a year. And one used to be right on my grandmother's block, so you would hear the Italian music, and they'd be making announcements in Italian. And, the stands were, pizza and zeppola and sausage and things like that. So it was great fun. I didn't make wine with my grandfather. However, I do remember as a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 or something like that, when my grandfather was probably still making the wine with the help of my uncles. I do remember boxes and boxes of grapes showing up one fall and then pressing it down in the basement. I remember on both grandparents' houses being given wine, a little bit of wine with water. I think most Italians back then did that. It was pretty normal. I was also drinking espresso at probably 8 or 9 years old. I do remember getting a little bit of wine, and if you tried it without the water, it would knock your socks off, that's for sure. At picnics and at the beach, probably almost always Italian food. Picnics, sometimes, my uncle would be barbecuing and he'd make a chicken with probably some sort of Italian dressing, but we'd be having Italian sausages and things like that from the barbecue. In my grandmother's backyard, there was always bowls of spaghetti. Very, very little American food, that's for sure. At the beach, we would go with eggplant parmesan and sausage and peppers, and we used to laugh because you look at the blanket next to you, and the non-Italians would be eating bologna sandwiches and peanut butter and jelly. So we had that special kind of meal. It was always fun to have the non-Italian friends come over, especially when you had a girlfriend or my cousins, my female cousins had a boyfriend that wasn't Italian. You used to have to coach them. Don't eat so much at the beginning. They'd be filling up on antipasto or pasta, and we'd be telling them, no, wait, this is only the beginning. We're going to be here for 4 or 5 hours. You have to pace yourself. I always remember my Aunt Mary telling us kids, don't fill up on bread. So that was the lesson for the Italian kids, because we used to start eating bread or trying to dunk it in the sauce. What did I take away from my heritage? As I said before, I think certainly respect. You know, the old country wasn't spoken about that much, which I wish it was. I wish I had known more. I wish I had thought to ask my grandparents more about what their life was like in Italy growing up and why they came and things like that. But I was at the younger end of the family, so my grandparents were older by then, and I just didn't think to ask, which I'm sorry to say I didn't. I think as I've gotten older, especially in the last 10 years or something like that, the Italian heritage is so rich. And in America, we don't get that message across. Italian art, history, food, and things like that are so rich. And I don't think the Italian Americans, for the most part, are given enough credit in this country for their contributions. I mean, certainly I grew up with 4 uncles who all fought in World War II. I think the biggest thing that everyone I talk to over the years about their Italian heritage is respect and the love of family.
how I was raised by my parents in an Italian American culture was about values, family values, not an overused, it's a trite word, but about respect for your elders, integrity, loyalty, friendships, family comes first. And that was an extended family. And I grew up with aunts and uncles and grandparents, and they all were part of that experience, just not my parents, because we all were learning from all those relationships. So when you grew up in an Italian American family, we were one big fat Italian family that we would be, as cousins, we were more like brothers and sisters. But we learned that because of our family, a good family of those that had those strengths, we said when we grew up, we wanted to emulate those things, and they set the mold for us to follow. The way they try to depict Italians, in my mind, our family would have considered that they're trying to make us look like we're low class. Okay? And I don't want to imitate the kind of way you talk to each other, because sometimes I can fall into it with my friends and stuff like that. You know, hey, what you doing? And maybe how you talk to each other, and you can get a little vulgar and things of that sort. You've seen those characters. You know, the Guido kind of personality. That's not what we wanted to be, and that's not what we were. We wanted to be successful people that had some type of class and distinction of who we were as people, whether you had money or not. This is how you acted and behaved, not like a Gaffone. Oh, God, we didn't talk with the New Jersey accent because I think we all speak with that kind of mannerisms. I know we use our hands when we speak, and I'm very animated. I am that, but I have a Boston accent, but it's not an Italian accent. It's a Boston accent. Now, if you grew up in the North End, you definitely have a different voice inflection when you grow up in an urban environment. And we kind of carry some of those types of things, and you sound like you're from that neighborhood when you are speaking to people. And it kind of is interesting, too. It's kind of, people get kind of, oh, that's kind of an interesting accent, whatever. But yeah, we didn't have those stereotypes. But then we did the immigration with an E, from not an I, but an immigration from the Italian enclaves to the suburbs, because everybody wanted to get out of the tenements or get out of the 2 or 3 family homes and get a little bit more space, because, you know, things were more crowded, et cetera. It was wonderful experiences. We made wonderful things out of it, et cetera, because everybody lived near each other. So we moved from those areas when I was young to another area that was still another Italian group of people living there, but it was not really out to the suburbs. And by the time I was, my sister and I were young, maybe 5 and 9, we ended up in Melrose, which was a waspish, basically, community. I think there maybe were 7 Italian families in that town when we moved in there at that time. So then but here's the funny part. All right, I'm not living in an Italian neighborhood anymore, right? But my cousin lives there. My other cousin moved there. A whole bunch of our family friends that were in East Boston with us, they moved there too. So you know what? We kept them around us, Bob, because when we socialized or did any family things, all the Italians are together anyways, and the rest of the people were all irrelevant. So even though we weren't living like next door to a bunch of all of Italian families, it didn't matter. We just brought them all with us, and when we congregated, we're still all together. My grandfather had grapes in his grapevine in East Boston, a 2-decker, and it went all the way up to the second deck, and the grapes are hanging from, etc. But I never saw him make wine from it or try to. But he had a beautiful garden in this really piece of crappy land that he made into a garden, which is what Italians do. Give them like a little square, anything that's dirt, and they'll find a way to make it into a little garden paradise, which he did. And I still remember working on it, but I don't remember making wine. And my other Norno, he lived in a 2-family too, and he rented. So it wasn't his house. Neither one had the house, they rented. So maybe they didn't have access to a cellar, but truthfully, I think my Norno Mazzarino would have just called up Chirachi's Liquor in North End and say, send me 3 gallons of Pastine wine, and he'll have it delivered to him. And that was good enough for him. Italian, without a doubt. This way, we took it with us. No matter where we moved or lived, those things continued to stay with us. Of course, we had we went for the summer. where we had a house on the beach, etc., and everybody was cooking. What came out of those kitchens were like gourmet meals of Italian food. Nana's cooking it, my mother's cooking it. They didn't stop cooking it. That's all we ate wherever we went. And then if we did go on a little picnic, they'd make the sandwiches, cold cut sandwiches. And when they went to school, I'd come to school with a cold cut sandwich, or I might have tuna fish, Italian tuna with mayonnaise. You know, you put in your bag, and by the time you have lunch, the bag is all greasy. And the kids would say, "Oh, you have like an eggplant sandwich or a veal cutlet sandwich." They say, and the kids next to you say, "What's that? What are you eating? What is that?" And sometimes we'd swap because, hey, I just want a bologna sandwich, and I'll eat their bologna sandwich. Thanksgiving at my aunt's house. She used to have Thanksgiving. Oh, great cook. My uncle would make the turkey. You know, he'd come out, the big presentation, the pies, the food. First of all, we had, and you know this, Bob, we had the first sit down, you say the primo, all Italian food. And we're eating away. And we had visitors. That's my brother-in-law's friend from BU, Walter was his name. And he's watching this. And he said, "Oh, this is phenomenal. I never had a Thanksgiving like this. This is what a feast. We haven't even served the turkey yet." And then we said, "Okay, now for the turkey." And he says, "What? Now we're gonna eat now the turkey? I thought this was the meal." And then out comes the American Thanksgiving meal. I took away my love for my family and how important it was. And that the whole idea of a nuclear family, when you study that in America, they talk about the father, mother, and the two kids. That's a nuclear family. And I studied that in sociology, etc. And then they said they had the term the extended family. Well, you couldn't have Italian families. Italian means extended. The words are together. When you say my family, I'm not talking about my parents only. We're talking about our family. And I just buried my cousin this weekend, who's my age. We grew up together. And there were 7 of us cousins. And basically what I shared at the eulogy is that we were more like brothers and sisters. Because our parents were all 3 sisters, and they were all close to each other. My mother was like the matriarch, and everything was around her. So that love for our family, for each other, was just so important. Everything we did in life still always involved each other, even if we all weren't alike and did different things. But that was still, we never left out of our gatherings and what we did together, and that's because we're family. And who else knows us? I said, you knew me all my life to my cousins. We grew up together. Most people meet in your life, they don't have that experience. They didn't know you from the day you were born. And that family that stays together. And I find the same thing is true of my cousins when I visit them in Italy. They treat me with that same respect because I'm family. And the pride of being in the same family was very important. Whatever our name was, we were proud of that name, and because that represented our parents, our grandparents, who I love dearly, and they were important to us. So that's the core, the heart of my Italian heritage.
being respectful. We also, in my immediate family, were encouraged to question things, to be kind, to value family and all of its warts and wonderful things that are part of family, to work hard, doing our best to achieve, to forgive as well, and to try to understand varying viewpoints of people. And so I think that it was an interesting mix of things that came from a different experiences and different people that were part of our lives. I think that what my parents tried to do, that as we were experiencing the world and had perhaps some negative things that might have happened to us, to understand them more. So I think they wanted us to be broader and learn how to deal with some of the ways the stereotypical view of Italians might come back at us as we were growing. I think they want us to feel that we weren't bound by that we could still achieve and do things and go about and have a happy life. We lived with my mom's parents. They had, as several Italian families did, had boarders and for many years. And then my parents, we lived upstairs, and the bedroom area was in the attic, and they took one of the bedrooms on the second floor and made it into a kitchen. And so that had been used by boarders. And so my parents lived there. And while my dad was finishing school and then started his first practice originally as an internal medicine physician. And so that neighborhood for Akron, Ohio is called North Hill. And that was an Italian-American enclave. I mean, that's where the Italian store was. And when we went to church at 7 a.m. with my grandparents, the Italians were all there early, and there'd be all these conversations in Italian and things, and you met people. And my parents had my sister then. Obviously, my mom was actually afraid my dad would never want to move because it was very nice at my maternal grandparents' home. But they then bought a home in the west side of Akron in an area called Highland Square. And so we moved there. But so I at least was not in daily contact with my maternal grandparents. But of course, we did some, maybe what I felt was typical. Every Sunday after church, we visited family and sometimes had dinner. Sometimes it was just for a quick stop, and saw them, or they were over to our house as well. So we were seeing folks still very, very frequently. It was an interesting, I know when I saw the word fun, I thought, did I think about this as fun? So, but I think what it was we knew Grandpa made wine, and this is really, interestingly enough, one of the first experiences that Dad took film for 2 of the years. But he made wine for a very, very long time, because I think I sent you the excerpt of what my dad recounted about his dad making wine earlier in the 30s during Prohibition. But it was interesting to see the steps of it, because I don't think anyone realizes how long the process is, or they have, again, a stereotypical idea of the process. But when you see the grinding of the grapes and then the pressing, and then the thing that amazed me so much when one of those years, my dad actually brought home some of the quote unquote raw pressed grape juice, and was to boil it on the stove and get it ready. He was going to bottle his own. And I just remember that when he started that process, I swear every fruit fly in Akron came to the screened windows. I've never seen so many insects at one time. But again, just thinking about that when it was an outdoor experience, that must have been like. But again, I think it also was, and it wasn't until I think later we could appreciate that this was how important this was for my grandfather, my dad's dad, to keep this tradition and to make wine and have pride in that product and what he did, and in the giving and the drinking of the wine that resulted from that, I think was very important for another way that they try to keep some of those Sicilian traditions here in the United States. You know, there's several interesting dynamics, Bob, with that. So one is being in the Italian family, and then one is when I told you we were allowed to question, because that was encouraged and we could ask anything, you know, at the dinner table. So we sort of have a two-pronged response. One was that we actually sat down and had dinner together, and that my dad was present at dinner, that it wasn't just mom and kids eating, but it was all of us. So that was one thing I think that set us aside. The other was actually the level of conversation. We actually talked to each other at dinner. We didn't eat silently. Beach wasn't too nearby, so where we went swimming, we were usually home in time. But for picnics and things, there was always something Italian at it, whether it was gnocchi or spaghetti and meatballs or a special salad or always fresh bread, homemade noodles. There was always going to be something that was Italian at those events. And my mom was a wonderful cook as well. And besides Italian, she expanded into many other ethnic types of food. So we also expanded our palates over time as well. But yeah, there was always something that was there that was Italian. I think what it comes down to for me, Bob, is not necessarily one memory, but the feeling of gathering and coming together. And my mom used to host Christmas Eve, and that was her special night where we'd have family. And when we got older as adolescents, we were allowed to invite a friend, or if someone was dating a boyfriend or a girlfriend, over. So there could be 50 or 60 people at the house. And it was just this memory of love, closeness, and generosity that was in the family. And I think it's mostly it's those types of gatherings. I miss that sense of coming together, a range of generations, hearing old stories, sharing new ones, and all of that, and just sort of the general goodwill of that experience. So I think that to me is part of the memory of that is very dear to me. Oh, my maternal grandparents, I love them dearly. It was so sweet, Bob. It was a surprise as well. My parents had put a tent up in our yard and invited not only relatives, but many of their friends. And the cake came from the Italian bakery, and they did this wonderful little kiss. And it's actually the first time I ever remember my grandparents kissing in public.
Well, my grandparents, I guess the biggest thing was family and closeness. Um, they lived right across the street from St. Leo's Church and right on the corner. And they had 4 daughters and 4 sons, and they all lived within a few blocks of them. So every holiday or birthday or whatever, any excuse, Easter, everybody gathered in my grandparents' house, their children, their children's children, and it was wonderful, having all my cousins there. We played, the kids had a great time, and so they made the importance of family very significant to me. That's the one thing that they kind of pushed at me about family. My grandfather, he immigrated here in 1899 when he was 19 years old. The only thing he ever sat me down and talked to her about was work. He said, when your job takes care of you and your family, always take care of your job. Be good at your job. Do the best at your job. I get a kick out of watching that stuff, but it really upsets me because most of the time they make them look like real stupid people, and the way they talk and the way they behave, and uh, it bothers me because I know darn well that there's no difference between the Italian people and anybody else about some intelligence and some not so intelligent, but it seems like every movie where the main theme is about Italian people, they make them look kind of stupid and silly, and it bothers me the way they do it. But Hollywoodizes everything. That's my word. They always change the things from where they really are just to sell tickets. So it annoys me a little bit by most of the way that they pick the Italian families. The neighborhood I grew up with, which is Corona, at that time, I was born in 1937. So I lived there and was growing up before the war, during the war, and right after the war, World War II. And everybody knew everybody. I mean, I couldn't go 3 blocks from the house and if I did something bad, the women or the men would yell, "I'm going to tell your father. I'm going to tell your grandfather, Ralph." Everybody knew who I was. And that's the way it was. It wasn't like just the relatives were family. It was the whole neighborhood was one big family. And it was lovely that way for kids to grow up that way. Everybody knew you. Everybody wanted to give you an apple or the cherries off their trees, or it was like one big family. I didn't make it with him, but I helped him. Well, kind of, I guess, but yeah, he made it every year, and he was like, oh my God, he was like a brain surgeon with the way he took care of it all, the way he put it all together. It had to be just perfect. He was a special guy. I'll tell you a quick story about him. It's not about wine, but my father was driving trucks cross country and down through the South and across to California. So one time he came back with a bunch of tobacco plants from the South, and he brought them to my grandfather because he had a big yard in the back. In Corona, in those days, they all had big yards, and we called them victory gardens during the Second World War. But they all had big yards. Some people even had chickens in their yards in those days. But anyway, my grandfather panicked. He said, I can't plant those. It's against the law to grow your own tobacco." And my father said, "That's in Italy. This is America. You can grow your own tobacco." And so he said, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" He said, "Yes." So anyway, he grew the tobacco, and the leaves were huge. And when it was time to pick the leaves, he went into his garage and he hung them up on the walls, along the walls of his garage, to dry out. And I remember one day I came home from school. I was living with them during the day when my mother and father worked, and my mother and father would pick me up at dinner time. And so they kind of raised me until I was about 8 years old, and my mother stopped working. So anyway, I came home from school, and he was in the garage, and I went in to see what he was doing, and he had an atomizer, and he was spraying this tobacco leaves with his wine. He had the wine in the atomizer, and it was, like I said, like a brain surgeon. He was being very careful, and his eyes were all bugged out. You know, look at this, Ralphie. Look at what I'm doing. This, what a smoke this is going to be. My family didn't go to the beach much, but we constantly had picnic. I wouldn't call them picnics, but they were get-togethers. And my mother and father had this. My father and I built. Well, he built it. I helped him. Built a big patio with a barbecue in the backyard at Hempstead. And when we moved there, and so we used to have the family gatherings there. And a lot of the films that I gave you show the barbecues and the pits and the table we built and all the stuff and all the people that would come. I had my when I graduated from high school, I had my graduation party there. I sent you a film of that. Well, that was there. So they didn't go to the beach much, but they always had Italian food, of course, at all the gatherings they had, inside or outside. To my grandmother, she loved me and all of her grandchildren so much, but she almost killed all of us because she kept feeding us and eat a little more, you know. And I would try to make her happy, and I would eat until I was about to bust. And then she would ask me to take some more, and I'd say, Grandma, no, I can, please, I can't eat anymore. And she'd come up to me and she took me by the chin once and just turned me gently up and looked so I could look into her eyes. And she looked very sad and said, you know, like my cooking? And I said, pass the meatballs. Give me a little more of that. You know, okay, Grandma, you know, and I ate some more. But they were great about the food and feeding us. And the women in particular, they loved, it was their joy, greatest joy, to see people scoff up their food. I think family is I'm not saying that other people aren't that way. I know some Jewish people I was very close to, and they're very much the same way about family. Family was number one with them. That was it's hard. It's not like something that they preached at you, but it was just the love that you felt from it, the closeness of it. It made you want to be like that when you got older and do it that way with your family, because there was so much love that was shared when you got together with everybody. It was so gentle and sweet, you know, and that's what I got from my grandparents.
One thing my grandfather used to tell me, you pick up the dirt, he says, it's the only thing they can't take away from you is the dirt and the land around you. And he was so right with that. And number two is hard work. It doesn't matter what you do, you have to be persistent, and you got to work hard. It doesn't matter what you do for a job. You know, these guys worked hard in the mills, and they were able to succeed in their jobs and raise families, etc., you know, and get through the Depression and everything else in pretty fair shape, actually, because they were willing to work more than the next guy. They had jobs during the Depression in the mills, you know, keeping the machinery running until they could open up again. And so both my grandparents were very fortunate in that regard. So they work hard, and you know, and all the family thing. I mean, family is everything. We all stay close. We still do. I think those are all the installed value. Well, there's definitely stereotypical movies that they typically show. You know, yeah, there was gangsters. I grew up in Providence, you know, the home of the Cosa Nostra in America, and so I grew up around it. You know, but nobody in our family ever. I mean, you know, they're honest to the day as long. They made all their money in various businesses. You know, legitimate. They were architects and doctors and lawyers, and you know, they put a lot of value on education. My grandparents put a lot of value on education. My father's side specifically, they came to this country in 1902. My grandfather had a secondary school education from Italy. at that point. And he instilled it in his children. Whatever he could afford for them for education, he did, or for musical instruments and lessons and things like that. So it was quite different than the typical paisano and that they show in the movies. I mean, I know Italians and you do it. Our lives were pretty benign in that regard. We're just like any other family, very much, except that we have better food. I grew up in an area with nothing but textile mills when I was a kid. Okay, I didn't know there was anything other than the smell of sheep dip in my life. I thought that was a natural smell of the air. Grandparents were, they were mill workers. The neighborhood was a mixed bag. We had immigrant Irish, immigrant English, Scots Irish, and French Canadian. It was all within the same area, but it was predominantly Italian, Sicilian Italian at that. And then the rest of them were, it was a scattering of Irish and English and Scots, in the area, because they also worked in the mills. So if you didn't work in the mills in that area, it was called Wansket in Rhode Island. If you didn't work in the mills, or at least your grandparents did, there's nothing they wanted for their children, that's for sure. Unless the kids, they wanted to have to work 16 hours a day for peanuts. So they made sure the kids didn't do that. I went down, I didn't make it. I'd watch it. I was too young when he was really making his wine. He had a big wooden press in the basement of our house, which used to be his house, but it was so big he couldn't move it. I think they built it in place. And he and his brothers and the paisanos in the neighborhood that he was friends with, they'd order the grapes. These would be dump trucks full of grape boxes, and they'd slide them down the old cold chute, into the basement, and they'd be down there all day, making the wine and putting it in barrels and putting it in the jugs and whatever they're going to do with it, and making the grappa, and we had a part of that cellar was basically a wine cellar. It had the stands for the barrels, and it had all the shelving for the bottles to be aged, etc. Not that a lot of it ever got to be that old, but it was good wine. I mean, but they were fiercely competitive, by the way, because these guys, these brothers of my grandfather that came and made the wine with him were up against the other part of the family, which was in Massachusetts, around Norton, Mass, and they'd be in competition with them as to who had the best wine. I remember going to Norton and visited his brother Anthony there and his family, and he offered us the homebrew, And my grandfather grabs it from my hands and says, "It's swill, throw it away." You see that we had Italian food. They bring the meatballs and they cook the macaroni on the beach. You used to be able to drive right up to the sand on the beach in Rhode Island, and Olibo's Beach. Well, the people who were related to us, first of all, the Olibo family. So we used to go there quite a bit, and you could drive on the lawn, and then there would be sand all the way down to the water's edge. It kind of went downwards and then out, and but we get 3 or 4 cars together. They put made shade over between the cars with wool blankets and stuff, and had the beach umbrellas up, and they would, and we'd all eat together. We had coolers and full of the soda drinks, beers for and wine, for the adults, and Skidskoo Beach in there for, for the soda, etc. that was in there, water, whatever. But it was mostly Italian food. My father would love to cook hot dogs once in a while. He bought a little portable grill so he could make some hot dogs, but they weren't very popular with that group. Well, I had a lot of Jewish friends, and they'd come over and haunt us for sausage. Something they couldn't get at home. Yeah, my friend Hank Pollock, he used to come over the time. He always bugged my mother. What do you got good, Grace? What do you got? She'd always, you're looking hungry, Hank. You need to get some macaroni and meatballs. So yeah, And the rest of my friends were really Irish and English. Foley's and Keoghs and Benjamins. There's French Canadian, English, Irish, Scotch. Those are some of my best friends as I grew up, and they'd all come over to the house, and my mother always put out something for them, or it could be dessert, or it could have been depending what time of day they showed up, but they'd show up when they were hungry usually. And likewise, I go over their house once in a while, and get a bologna sandwich or something, whatever the hell they were eating. I'm very strong about my heritage. One of the things I am is a genealogist, as you probably are aware of, and I have instilled it in my children that they should be proud of the Sicilian Italian side as they are, and as much as they are of our side, they're also very proud of their mother's heritage.